All right, good morning and welcome to this month's edition of the Virtual Ag Tour with Arizona Farm Bureau Ag in the Classroom. We're so excited that you've joined us here today. Before we get started, I just want to go with a little housekeeping thing since it's been a couple of months since we've seen your smiling faces. If you can remember to put your computer on mute and stay on mute. And if you have questions as we go through today's virtual tour, please go ahead and enter those questions into the chat. And we will ask our guest farmer those questions as is appropriate through today's presentation. So again, all questions go into the chat, and please remember to keep yourself on mute. As always, if you have to leave a little bit early during today's virtual tour, the video will be posted on our YouTube channel, AZFB AITC, and will also be shared out through our teacher listserv and our social media channels, so you can catch the spots that you missed. So welcome to today's virtual tour. Today we are talking all about pollen, but maybe in a little different way than you think about it. When we think about pollen, we tend to think about, of course, pollination and bees. But today we're going to take a little different spin on it, and we're going to be meeting with one of our Maricopa County farmers, Amber Owens, who has a business where they collect pollen to be used in a very different way than perhaps we think about it. So welcome, Amber. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
It's a little weird that they can't talk back to you. So just imagine all of the students saying, hi, we're so excited.
They're all waving. Good morning.
Exactly. So I'm going to go ahead and just let you take the rest of the time today.
All right. Well, as Katie said, I am Amber Owens. And so I live in Buckeye, Arizona. So we're out in the West Valley, and this is a picture of my family. So my husband, Marty, and our little boys. So many of you are in first grade, and the first one, his Jewel, he's in first grade too. And then the next two, they're in kindergarten, and those are Kyle and Ian. So they're very close to your age. So they sometimes try and help me when they can, but they're usually busy with school and animals and all that stuff. So, all right, so this is a really old picture. It's from like 1967. And this was my husband's grandpa. And he's on a tractor, and you can see he's got some big machine going, and he's vacuuming pollen out of the field. So I thought this would be really cool for you to see where we got started at. So my husband's grandpa, a long time ago, he had a friend that he helped. And when that man was getting out of business, Papa Hank, he took it over. And so he worked the business. And then my husband's mom, we call her Grandma Bubba, she took it over and ran it. And then my husband and I have taken it over since then. So we're in our third generation of family who's run the business. So we've been around a long time. There's not very many people who collect pollen. In the United States, there's only like 35 of us at the last time I heard. So that's maybe how many kids are in your class. So that's how many people who collect the pollen for everybody in the United States. So why do we collect pollen? Well, some of us have allergies. I bet if you look around in your classrooms, there's lots of you that sometimes have allergies, or you sneeze, things like that. So we take the pollen, and I sell it to different companies, and they make the allergy shots. When you have to go get shots, or if you go to the doctor and they do the little scratch test to see if you're allergic to something. And then sometimes you get a shot, or they give you a pill to take to help your body be able to combat your allergies and not have all that bad allergy reactions. So that's why we collect pollen. It's basically used for medicine. All right. So what pollens do we need? Well, they use lots of different pollens, but we collect pollens that are natural in the desert or in Arizona in our areas. They collect other pollens in other areas. Sometimes our pollens even get shipped overseas to Sweden, and they make their medicines there as well. So some of the plants that we collect, as you can see here, before we can collect them, we have to know what plant we're collecting, right? So these are some of the different plants that we collect. You can see the first picture up there. We're measuring the plant to show the scale to know which type of plant that is. So that's a type of a salt bush. And there's 4 of those different kinds of plants in our area. So we had to identify and prove that this is the right plant. And then you can see there's a mesquite tree and a salt cedar tree. And then there's another salt bush. Atriplex polycarpa is what it's called. And on the first row, then on the bottom row, another desert bush, but we see them in lots of landscaping. It's called a rabbit bush. And then a burrow brush, or I'm sorry, not burrow brush, a desert broom is in the middle picture, and it grows into a big bush, and it'll look like cotton sometimes in the fall. And then the last picture you see there is one of our 3 types of pigweed or careless weed that grows in our area. So that's actually an Amaranthus palmeri. So we collect up to 18 different plants in Arizona that we sell to other companies.
So Amber, how did you become an expert on all of these plants? Is that something that you did in school, or is it something that you've learned as you've started collecting pollen with the family business?
So I've learned it as I went. I did go to school in the agriculture field, but I didn't major in plants. I majored in animal sciences. And so my degree is actually working with animals, but now I work with plants too. And so I've learned a lot of it just on the job training. So I started working with my mother-in-law when I was in high school, before she was my mother-in-law, and started helping her. So I started learning along the way. And then as I began to take over, then I had to really learn how to tell which types of plants there were. So like the last picture with the careless weed, there's 3 different types in our area. One of them has little teeny tiny hairs that you have to use a microscope to look at. And, you know, you have to look at how long the little flowers are and things like that to be able to identify them. So those are things that I had to really, I have lots of books that I use as references or resources. I've even gone in and talked to different plant specialists. They're called botanists, that have helped us to learn how to identify which plants are different plants, because at different stages in the plant life cycle, depending on how big or small it is, it can be easier or harder to tell. So I've had to learn a lot of it just from experience. Okay, so once we've identified what the plant is, then we need to collect it. And so we have a couple different ways that we collect. The first picture, they're collecting it off of a tree, and they're just snapping the branches off. And then in the middle, you see we're collecting some mesquite, and they're clipping or picking off the little tassels that the blooms are on. And then in the last one, I'm vacuuming a different type of desert bush with a backpack vacuum. And we've gotten super scientific and technical and duct taped a cone to it to help funnel it in. So there's not a lot of specialty things in the pollen collection because there's not a lot of us. So we have to make things and create things as we go. So we have to use our brain a lot.
And what a great example, because that's something that as teachers, we're always trying to share with our students is sometimes you've got to engineer things on the spot. And that is a great example that technology is not available there. So you have to create what it is that you need. That's awesome.
Yep, exactly. Okay, in this video, you can see where one of our helpers she's just picking the plants off. She grabs a hold of the little tassel and just snaps it off. So that connection part is tender and it breaks easy. So she's just popping them off like you would be picking a flower to take to your mom for Mother's Day. Some of the trees you can see she has gloves on because some of those trees, they have thorns. And so we want to protect our hands and not get poked. So they just pick them off and drop them in their bucket. And Then when the bucket gets full, they dump them into the box. And then when it comes in, we weigh it to see how much product is there. So it looks pretty easy, but you can see how small those are, and it takes a long time to fill a bucket.
So we have a question for you, Amber.
Yes.
So we know that pollen, people can be allergic to the pollen and it makes you sneeze. So are you guys, when you're picking the pollen, are you wearing masks or do you just sneeze the whole time?
Well, it depends, because not everybody is allergic to the same pollens, and everybody's reactions could be different. So you could sneeze, your eyes could water, your nose could run. So if it's a pollen that we're allergic to, then sometimes we'll wear a mask, or sometimes they'll put a bandana around their face to help not suck all that pollen up their nose. And then different pollens, there's two different types of pollen, I guess. Yeah, pollens, that some they fly in the wind. And so when you bump the plant, you'll see the pollen fly. And those are really easy to breathe in and get an allergy reaction to. Some of these, like the mesquite, they tend to be bee pollinated. And so the pollen sticks to the plant better, and it doesn't fly in our face and get all over us quite as much. So the reactions aren't as bad when we're outside collecting with those types of plants. All right, so here's one. This is a ragweed, and we're picking this up by Flagstaff. So sometimes we have to travel around the state. And with this one, we're just snapping it off. And you can see I have a little knife there in my hand. And so we're just taking the top part where the flower is and tossing it in the box to get it ready to bring back.
So you said that you're traveling across the state. Where are some of the places that you go to collect pollen?
So we go, we have a few, we can go lots of different places, but we kind of find our spots that are good and go back to those because we know that they're usually good. So we go to Flagstaff for juniper. Sometimes we can go in the Camp Verde area, but again, there's different types of trees. And so we have to make sure we're getting the right juniper tree. So we go to Flagstaff for those. There's 3 different kinds of ragweed that grow in Arizona. And some of them will go down towards southern Arizona, around Tucson, in that area. There's some that we go up towards like Young, Payson area up on the Mogollon Rim. There's others that we go towards Flagstaff or Peoples Valley, Prescott area. And then there's some that is right here in Maricopa County. So we kind of travel all over depending on what we're looking for. So here we're collecting some juniper, and it's kind of hard to see, but there's some clippers there, and you'll see it in a second where we just kind of clip the little tip of the plant off. And then you can see inside those little brown ends, there's little teeny tiny veins of pollen in there. So we're just going to get a little bit out of each one of those brown heads. So the pollen comes off of the male part of the plant, and that's used to create the seed. So you can see in there, next on the trees after they pollinate, you'll get the seeds or the fruit that comes off. And this one was really, really windy when we were collecting. You know, the weather doesn't listen to us when we ask it to be nice to us. And so sometimes it's really, really hot, and sometimes it's really windy, and sometimes we get rained out. And so we just have to do our best to harvest when the plants are ready to harvest, because they just kind of do what they want, and we just have to work around it. So again, she clipped it and put it in a box. So here's some of those closer up. Again, the first one is a saltbush, and it's got lots of little yellow heads on it. And then if you can see on that mesquite right there in the middle, those little hairs sticking out on some of those, On the very end of those hairs is where the pollen is. So it's way out there on the tip. So there's a lot of plant material there for a small, teeny tiny pollen. It's teeny, teeny tiny. You have to look under a microscope to see that. And then the salt cedar, it always has lots of pretty colors. It could be white or pink or purple, just depending on the color, how the flower comes out on the tree. So another technique for collecting pollen is to vacuum it. And so we can do that on the plants that the pollen flies when you touch it. When you bump it, it'll just fly. We can collect that with a vacuum. So you can see I'm just bumping the plant and then the pollen will fly and I'll suck it up in the vacuum. And then we have a bag in the vacuum and it holds it all right there. So this is we don't have a lot of extra plant materials and trash in it when we go to process it later. But not a lot of plants can be vacuumed.
And there you can better see the cone that you've duct taped to your vacuum.
Yep. I get lots of exercise on those days when I do lots of walking. So.
And is the vacuum's just a normal vacuum?
Yep, it's just a normal vacuum like your janitors would use at your school. On our wish list is to get one that is battery powered so that we don't have to have a generator in the pickup or in the Ranger following us along and tethering us. So like with that vacuum, I can only go as far as my extension cord will let me go. And then I have to come back and go a different route. So. All right, so this is another thing that we've had to engineer, only we had to get someone to help us do it because I'm not that smart when it comes to engineering things. But this is a vacuum that we can put on our tractor. And so it's an old blower back there that they've put it to the PTO, which turns every tractor, and it creates this big suction. And then we've put those canvas bags on the out parts of the pipe to catch the pollen, and then the air goes on through the bag. And so there's a big bar with slits in it, and we drive along the fields. In this picture, we were trying to collect some Bermuda grass. We use this one sometimes if we're collecting something that's in a field and it doesn't have any other plants in it, it's just that field that's blooming with a certain plant. Or we can do it on like the edge of the road, as long as it's just that type of plant. We have to be very careful that we don't what they call cross-contaminate. We can't mix other pollens together because we have to sell just that pollen and it has to pass a purity test. And if it has any other pollens or too many plant parts and debris in there, then they reject it and they send it back and they say you have to get it cleaner before we can buy it. So once the pollen's collected, what do we do with it, you might ask? We can't just mail it off the way it is. So we have to bring it back and we dry it. So if we've vacuumed it, going through the vacuum process, that helps dry it out already. So we don't lay it out, because if we laid it out on the tarp, the wind would just blow it all away. But this is some of the mesquite. You saw that the lady was picking by hand when she was snapping it off. And so we lay it out on the tarp, and in Arizona, we can let the sun bake it and dry it. And in one day, it'll be all dried. In other parts of the world, they're not as fortunate to have as much sun and dry weather as we do. So they have to build actual rooms or buildings or machines to come in and dry the pollen. But we're very fortunate and thankful that we can use the sun to dry our pollens. Then after it's dried, we box it up into those boxes. And they goes into our first process to kind of mill it down. So it goes in this machine, and in the machine, there's those screens. You can see there's some there on the step, and there's different sizes, and it breaks the plant up, and the trash will come out the end into the trash can. And then the smaller pollen and the smaller debris goes down into the bags. And so we'll run it through that machine 3 or 4 times. depending on the screen sizes, until we can reduce it down, and it'll be ready to go to the next step. So in this one, it's gone through that caisson machine 3 or 4 times, and now it's into a kind of a coarse, powdery, grainy, gritty. Think about like sand and really fine stuff, all mixed dirt and sand. So that's kind of what it's like here. You have different sizes. And so if you watch the color as it spins, there's a vacuum that's pulling the air, throws it up, and then the vacuum pulls the smaller pieces. So the pollen's going to be small, and the smaller debris pulls it through the screen, and then it goes through the hose. And in just a second, it'll show you, if it didn't already, into those what we call cyclones, and that's what collects it. And then there we go. She's gonna, I think, scroll over, and you can see that. So we're separating again. We're getting all the trash and the plant parts that broke up when we ran it through the mill, and we're separating all that out. It'll go through this with 2 or 3 different screen sizes. And each time the size of the screen gets smaller and smaller, so that you get less and less trash going through with the pollen. So you can see the cyclone over there. And so this is what it looks like after it's been sieved. This is what the trash is. And so that goes into the trash bin. And then this is what went into the can. So you can see the difference in the color. Most pollens are going to be some sort of shade of yellow. Occasionally there'll be a little bit different color, but most of them are going to be yellow. And some of them are bright yellow and some of them are a lighter color yellow. But you can see this one, as you get more trash out, the color is brighter. And so it's gone through one screen, she collected it in the can, dumped it back into the box to go through a smaller screen size. So once we get it as clean as we can with the screen, sometimes we have to put it in and we use some different chemicals to wash it and separate out. So you can see on the top is one color, and that's where the pollen is. And then on the bottom is a different color, and that's where the debris. So if there's any dirt in there or plant parts, that separates out. And then we can drain the trash out of the bottom, and the good stuff stays in the top. So once it goes through there, before we can ship it, we have to do our final hand sieving. And so we shake it through there, through the screen size. And what stays on top is going to be if there's any chunks in there or any of the last little pieces of debris that didn't come out in the wash. And you can see the difference in the colors. Color tells us a lot with pollen of what's on top. And then there we go. And then that's the nice, pretty stuff in there, ready to go in the jar and be shipped off. See how bright and yellow that is? So we have to use a microscope to see how clean the powder is. And so there on the side of your screen are just pictures of different pollens and what it looks like under the microscope. Some of them are smooth, some of them are really bumpy. So each pollen is different. And so we have to look in there and make sure that there's not any more debris. Like if you see down on the picture that says N, for the letter N, there's some extra stuff on that. Yep, right in there. So that could be debris that is in there, and you can only have a small amount of that. Otherwise, your pollen will be rejected. All right, so we have to keep it frozen to keep it fresh. And so we have a couple different freezers that we store our pollen in. after it's gone through our machines and when it's waiting to be shipped or to be cleaned. And so there's just two examples of places that we've stored it. So we have to label it, have to tell when it was collected, what it is, what process has been done to it. Some of our companies don't want their pollen to be washed in chemical. They want it to not have any chemical. So we have to make sure that we identify what's been done to it. We also have some paperwork that we keep that goes along with the process, so that we can go back and look if there's ever a question on what we did to a pollen or when it was handled, anything like that, we have to go back. So because it's used for medicine, we have to follow all the rules that the FDA puts out and the regulations, and we have to make sure that we don't, we have to clean really well between plants and keep it all separate and not let them mix.
How long is the pollen good for?
So it's hard to say, really. We've had pollen that has been 10 or 12 years old and they've been able to use it. But as times advance and regulations get tougher or more strict, currently our companies that we deal with, according to the FDA, they're only allowed to have pollen that's 3 years old. So from the time we pick it off the plant or the tree until the doctor uses it for whatever they're doing, it has to be done within 3 years. And so some of our companies, they only want pollen that was collected that year. So in the fall, the companies that we work with, they send us what they think that they're going to need. And then we bid back and tell them we can get how much we can get and how much it will cost them. And then they decide for sure this is exactly what they need. And they send us something called a purchase order. And then that's our order for the year of what we have to fill. And when we do that, then we'll tell them we'll collect it this year or it was collected last year. And this is when we can send it to you. And so then they can tell us, yes, we want it, or no, we don't. So sometimes we like to have some in the freezer so that if somebody calls and says, we ran out, do you have any? Can you send us some? We can send them some. But if we collect too much and then we can't sell it, then we can't use it because it's gotten old. So once all the processes have been done and it's ready to ship, this is what it looks like. So it's a really fine powder and we put it in jars and we have to label what's in there. And so we have to use their scientific name. So this is the picture in the beginning that was the rabbit bush. But its scientific name is Ambrosia deltoidea. And then we put the lot number so that we can identify it. So this was lot 2202. So for us, we collected it in the year 2022. And then each pollen has a number. And so its number is 2 for that year. And then we have to put the weight, and we weigh it in grams. And then the tare is what the jar weighs, because we don't get paid on the jar weight, we just get paid on the powder. And so we have to take the tare out. And so in that jar is 600 grams of pollen in a powder form. And so we have to make sure that it doesn't leak when we're shipping it. So we tape it shut on the top, and then we wrap it in bubble wrap, and then we put bubble wrap in the box, and then we put it in the box with all of our paperwork and our plant samples. And so it's either a picture, like you've seen lots of the pictures, or it could be an actual piece of the tree or the bush that we've dried out, and we send it with them so that when our customers get it, they can double check that they can look under the microscope and see that it's the right pollen, and then they can see that the plant that came with it is the right plant and it all matches up so that everything is correct.
Well, I know that when I found out what it was that you did, I thought this was the neatest thing ever, because I knew there was allergy shots and I knew people got allergy tests, but I had no idea that agriculture played such a large role in that entire process for that medicine. So thank you for spending time with us here today, sharing what you do and how you do it. And I still can't believe there's only 35 of you who do it. Which is pretty cool. So friends, we do have a couple more minutes. So if you want to submit any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat. If you have any questions after that you think of course, you can always email us at aitc@azfb.org, and we will get those questions over to Miss Amber and get those questions answered and back to you. So thank you then. Doesn't look like we have any last minute questions coming in. So Amber, thank you so much again for your time here today and for sharing your story. Very, very cool.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right, friends, we hope you enjoyed the last week and a half of your 2022-2023 school year. And we're looking forward to seeing you all again next year for our new series. Have a good one.